And so there's a blasting cap attached to some C4, attached to a cratering charge. We're starting to deal with a very sketchy situation here. Carl almost killed and blew up my entire platoon when I was a soldier. Now, I was a combat engineer and Carl was in my platoon, so combat engineers, you work a lot and deal with demolitions. And sometimes demolitions can be massive and sometimes they can be tiny, but in this case, we were working with some pretty heavy demolitions. More specifically, there's something out there called a cratering charge, and cratering charges do exactly what they're called. They create these massive holes in the ground. And I want you to think about the strongest firework you've ever felt in your life. Now, times that by 10, that's what a cratering charge feels like when you get to feel the explosion of a cratering charge. So the training day is actually very easy and simple. We're just learning very basic army doctrine. But the thing about Carl is that he almost never seemed to pay attention or never really cared. And you always need to have a certain amount of respect whenever you're handling or dealing with demolitions. Because my mistake can end up hurting a lot of other people, and your mistake can end up hurting me. Now it comes time to set up our cratering charge, and pretty much that involves soldiers carrying this charge and walking it about half a mile down the range. And typically, before you actually set your cratering charge, we have things out there called a shape charge. And a shape charge creates a hole to put in the cratering charge. And the physics behind it is very simple. If you put a cratering charge in a hole and you cover it up, by creating more pressure, you're creating more of a surface area for that explosion to expand and create a bigger hole. Well, we're all sitting there and we have our pre-made hole and we're lowering down the cratering charge and we're setting up our demolition. And the only time I ever really felt uncomfortable when dealing with demolitions, there's something out there called a blasting cap. And the only way I know how to describe it to somebody who's never dealt with demolitions, it sort of is like a firecracker, but you use this firecracker to blow up other things. You see, demolitions, it's really not that complicated. To blow up something big, you need a smaller explosion to ignite it. And so this blasting cap, though, it's tiny, and if you jump on a blasting cap or you hit it around, it could go off. And so there's a blasting cap attached to some C4, attached to a cratering charge. We're starting to deal with a very sketchy situation here. And we need to cover this hole, but we want to be very careful. Like, you don't want to kick some rocks on the hole and, explode the blasting cap. Carl must have not gotten the message as to why you need to be careful about that small demolition stuff. And I'm laughing because it's like crazy that this is even a story. Carl starts throwing rocks on top of the cratering charge, on top of the C4, on top of the blasting cap. And we're sitting in the hole, and we just hear tunk, tunk. We're like, who's throwing that? My squad leader at the time, I'm not going to name him, but he's very knowledgeable in demolitions. He's sapper tabbed, and, he has a very strong pucker factor. Like, he doesn't really fear things at all, but this is the first time I ever saw where he's like, dude, what are you doing? And so we're just all sitting there like, how many times is Carl almost going to kill one of us and like an entire platoon? And of course, Carl proceeds to get yelled at and told to go back to range safety. He takes off all of his kit and he starts to do push-ups. And from there, I'll never forget that my entire platoon was almost eliminated because of Carl. However, this is not the end of the Carl saga.